Today's gospel comes from the book of Matthew. Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand, and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it when we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it when we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that you were sick or in prison and we visited you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.' Then he will look at those on his left hand. 'You are accursed. Depart from me into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they also will answer, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life."
Let us pray. O Lord, may your words only be spoken and your words only heard. And we ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Well, first, just in case there's anybody who has not been here the last couple of weeks or who is visiting us for the first time today, and for those who may be watching online, and we understand that there actually is a growing group of people who are watching us on a regular basis on Sunday mornings online, this is not my hair, okay? And maybe I should just say a word about this. The youth group and the adults played a football game together, and the bet was that if the adults won, Christian would shave his McDreamy hair. And I argued that if the adults lost, I should just have to shave my head also. But for some reason, that didn't seem quite as compelling. So Christian came up with this idea that I would have to wear a wig for 21 days after the game. I would need to wear a wig of the youth group's choosing. And needless to say, we lost. Okay, so that's that. Also, perhaps I should just say a word that today is in the church year, Christ the King Sunday. You know, the Christians don't believe that we are just a single group of people gathered in a single place, but we identify with people gathered throughout the world and throughout time. And that group of people for the last several thousand years has seen, this day as Christ the King Sunday, and that's why we have the allusions to Jesus being our King today. All that being said, the world can be divided into givers and takers. And so the question is, which one of the two are you? Are you a giver or are you a taker? Which one am I? Am I a giver or am I a taker? And the difference between the two may not be as clear-cut as we would first think. Takers aren't necessarily cutthroat and cruel. They're just oriented towards themselves, protecting themselves. They aren't necessarily even greedy. They just believe in getting what is their rightful due, what is their right and what is their privilege. And what could be more reasonable than that, right? I mean, just getting what is due to us. Givers, on the other hand, aren't so concerned with themselves. They're concerned with other people. And givers aren't so concerned with getting their rightful due, as reasonable as that may be, but they're really concerned with helping other people in whatever they can in whatever ways are needed. And so this morning we want to think about those two classes, and we want to take the two groups of people, and we want to use the parable that Jesus told, the parable of the sheep and the goats, to think about in which class we belong. And we're going to look at a characteristic of givers and takers, and we're going to tease it out a little bit and apply it to our lives. And I'm going to just warn you up front. This is a profoundly disturbing parable. I mean, it has the potential to deeply unsettle us. Because if we really think of what's going on here, the distinction between the sheep and the goats may not fall as far away from us as we first think that it does. So the characteristic that we're going to look at of givers and takers is that takers tend to have a kiss up, kick down approach to life. Kiss up, kick down approach to life. And what that means is that takers tend to identify with, associate with, help out people who they think their relationship with that person can in some way benefit for them. Associate with, identify with, help out those who in some way will help them. Takers, givers, on the other hand, don't think about that at all. They, again, are just looking for ways to help other people. So takers tend to look at kiss up, kick down, and that's precisely what the people in today's gospel do. In today's gospel, when Jesus said, I was hungry and you didn't feed me, I was naked, you didn't clothe me, thirsty, you didn't give me a drink, they say, but when did we see you, Jesus? And the implication is that if they'd known it was Jesus, they surely would have done that for him. Because if they'd known it was Jesus, the great king of the universe, there would have been tremendous benefit simply by association of being with Jesus. And they only felt free to discard him, to discount him, to ignore him because they thought he was beneath them. Because in the people that they came into contact with who were different than they were, they thought those people were beneath him. And so, if they thought it was Jesus, the great king of the universe, they would have been all too happy to have been able to say, hey, guess who I had lunch with? Jesus. You can see it on the Facebook wall. You'll never believe who I had for dinner today. Jesus Christ. Holy cow. People would be so excited about that. Think of all the money you could make. A restaurant, Jesus ate here. They sell what? Bagels or tomatoes or tacos. They have the image of Jesus on them on eBay for like $30,000. Somebody sees it. Imagine what you could do if you could put out a sign, Jesus ate here. So they say, Jesus, if we'd known that was you, holy cow, we would have been the first in line. We would have done anything you asked us to do because there would have been a clear benefit to them in doing so. They kiss up, but they kick down because the people that they saw in which Jesus was present, they thought were somehow beneath them or not worthy of their time. They felt free to disregard, discount those people. When we takers, kiss up, kick down, they feel free to disregard, discount, sometimes even attack people who are different than them. The classic example of this in our modern culture is an experiment done by a guy by the name of Stanley Milgram, a Stanford psychologist. Many of you have heard of him. This was a profoundly unsettling experiment. And you probably remember it, and some of you may have studied it even recently in your schooling. They did the experiment right after World War II, and in World War II, all kinds of good people, all kinds of people who went to church, killed all kinds of Jews, wiped out almost a whole population. And they said, how in the world can this happen? So they said, let's do a study. And what they did is they had two scientists on board, and one scientist would play a student, and the other scientist would play the authority figure, the person running the experiment. And then they would solicit volunteers. The volunteer would come in and they'd be told that you're going to have a choice whether you're going to play the student or the teacher. We're going to pick names out of a hat. It'll depend on which one you pick. And all the pieces of paper they picked out of the hat, both sides said teacher. So they thought they were making a choice, but what they didn't know is that all the names in the hat had teacher on it. So they would become the teacher in this experiment, and they were told what this experiment is, it's a measure in learning. It's a measure on how well, on the effect of punishment on learning. So when a person gets a wrong answer, shock them. And every time they get a wrong answer, increase the shock. And they had the shocks labeled so that when they went from like 75 volts to, I think, 450 volts. When it got to 450 volts, the labels were quite clear. These were lethal levels of voltage. And when people would express misgivings, they would say the experiment must continue. Please, press that lever. They'd say, oh, but I just heard that person, he's screaming over there. The experiment must continue. You have no choice. I don't know if I can do this. You must press that lever for this experiment to go on. Before they did this experiment, they thought that maybe 2%, maybe 3% of people at the outset would administer lethal doses of electricity. They thought most people very early on would stop and say, no, I won't be a part of this. I don't care what you're measuring. This is unethical. This is inhumane. But what was so disturbing was that they found that fully 65% of the people in that experiment were willing to kill the person in the other room. Why? Because they were willing to kiss up and kick down. They had an authority figure in the room with them. They benefited from the relationship to that authority figure because pleasing that authority figure gave them the benefit of feeling like they were a good person. They abstracted the person in the other room and they were willing to do great harm to that other person. Kiss up, kick down. Now what you don't know is that there were, and because we don't hear as much about this, there's two parts of the experiment that you don't hear that much about. One is that the 35% of people that wouldn't go on with the experiment, the great majority of them were people of faith. And they said, this violates my conscience. So you don't hear much about that. That was part of the experiment. The other part you don't hear much about is that the groups were actually divided into 4 different groups. The experiment was actually divided into 4 different groups and 4 different control groups, and there were a couple other profound results of this experiment. And so in the first group, what they had the teachers do, the actual subjects of the experiment, they thought the students were the subject, but they were the actual subjects of the experiment. What they had them do is they actually took the student's hand, so they're sitting right next to the student, and they'd actually take their hand and place that hand on the electric plate. And so when they'd administer that shock, they'd feel the person jerk. They'd see them say, ow! And, when they'd have to up it, they'd say, please, no. And when they did that, it's still kind of amazing, but 70% of people said, absolutely not. I won't do this. So, the vast majority of people, whereas on the one hand, the vast majority of people would administer the shock, on the other hand, the vast majority of people, when they're sitting right next to the person, when they could look them in the eye, when they could see him face to face, they would not do it. Second class, they moved them into another room. And this time they couldn't see the person, but they could still hear them yell. And they would say, ouch! They'd say, I don't know if I can take another shot. Please don't. I think it's my heart. And when they could hear people saying things like that, only 60% of the people wouldn't continue. Okay, 60% still. So the majority of people still would not, no matter how many times, no matter what the scientist said, they wouldn't do it. But, when they put the person in another room, and you couldn't see the person's face, you couldn't hear their voice, when those people became an abstraction, that's when 65% of the people taking that test were willing to do great harm, to kill somebody else. And so one of the chief lessons of this experiment is that when we allow people to become abstractions, when we're separated from the consequences of our actions and words upon them, we are very willing to do them great harm. And you see, when we kiss up and kick down, that's exactly what we're doing. Is we're creating the group that we're kicking down to has become an abstraction to make us feel better about ourselves. And here's where it starts to hit really close to home. Think, for instance, of politics. Think of political, think of liberal and conservative. What are those? Abstractions. They're abstractions. They don't exist in the real world. Because people, most every person I have ever met is a mixture of both. You talk to people on the right subject, you're going to find that people are a mixture of both. And what we tend to do is this is sort of a classic scenario. If I'm one or the other, you take your pick because both sides do it. You have this thing in the world today, you have Christians on the right, Christians on the left. Well, from my perspective, the second you add anything other than Christian to it, it stopped being Christian. You're being played. You're being played an agenda other than the agenda that Jesus had, because Jesus wouldn't have associated with either group. And the second you add that thing, you're taking a very specific agenda, and it's not necessarily. And so what happens on the internet is that people put up political memes, and do you think that anybody has ever changed their position? Do you think any liberal has ever changed their position by a political meme they've seen on the internet, or any conservative because of the meme that they've seen? I say, wow, I never thought of it like that. Well, that person's right. I was Republican all my life, but now I'm a Democrat. Think that ever happens? Think a Democrat ever says, oh, you're right. How did I ever miss that? No, what happens is people look at that and we look at that other person and say, oh man, that person's an idiot. And then we galvanize our own position. We strengthen our own position even more. And then that other person can, and then that other person say, see, I was right, because look at how bad that person is. And both sides need each other. They're flip sides of the same coin. The one couldn't exist without the other. If I put the meme up, and if I'm, take your choice, right or left, I put it up, and the other side reacts just like I think they're going to react, then I can say, see, they're bad just like I thought I was, and what that does, that makes me feel good about myself. Because it shows what a good person I am, because I can point out how bad they are. And I kiss up, because who I'm kissing up to is my political party, because I think they're the good guys, and when I can identify with that group, then I feel good about myself, and I kick down to this abstracted group, the other party, who I don't even treat as people anymore, just some clueless idiots who don't really deserve to be on the face of this planet. And what goes to heck in a handbasket? The welfare of all of us. And, people on both sides have long said, you know what, somewhere along the line we just stopped having great leaders. Don't know what happened, but somehow we just entered into this leadership vacuum. And in the absence of leaders, the culture suffers. And what happens in the culture, people stop saying what's right, but they just start saying what's right for me. Because leadership isn't giving any picture of that we all belong to this much larger group, our shared history, our shared values. We lose that, and we identify with these narrow groups, and we begin to kiss up to that group and kick down to the other. But both just keep the whole thing going. And it's not in the best interest of anybody. Think about how that works in terms of religion. You would probably know that there are people who think that Episcopalians are going straight to hell. Do not pass go, there's just a trap door in their basement, boom, we're gone. And there are people who would choose not to associate with us because they're afraid if they associate with us, they're kissing up to the groups of which they're a part. And by their refusing to associate with us, by their refusing to be a part of us, then they show what good people they are. They get that benefit of boost to their identity, but they kick down to us because they don't really see us as people. All right, that's easy. Now let's take a group like, Westboro Baptist. Let's take a group like Westboro Baptist. Westboro Baptist is the one that puts up those horrible, horrible signs. They're just as hateful can be. Are they Christians? I don't know. God forgive me. It does not seem to me that they are. Are they Christians? I don't know. But you know what I do know? They're people. They're people. And if they're people, I'm not free to discount or disregard them. Hey, hurt people. My guess is they were hurt somewhere along the line. And so if Westboro gets up and they start protesting, put all their signs up, and I want to get up and put my sign up about how bad Westboro is that likely to change anybody in Westboro's side? No, that'll make me feel better about myself because I'm protesting what they're protesting, but that's going to galvanize them and it keeps the whole system going. What's the one thing that might change something? If I said to somebody at Westboro, hey, if I got to know them, I said, hey, have lunch with me. Let's share a meal. And over time, I developed a relationship. And if I loved them instead of hurting them like they've so clearly been hurt their whole life long, would that make a difference? I don't know. But if anything's going to, that's the only one I can see that can. But it only comes when we start kissing up and kicking down and looking out for the welfare of everybody. Would I be willing to associate with them? Oh, I don't know. I'd lose a lot of credibility in the circles in which I roam if I started to identify with anybody from Westboro Baptist, right? And then one last one, and I apologize because this gets maybe the toughest of all. We're going to go from preaching to meddling here, and I apologize up front. But rich and poor, they're abstractions. We're all just people, and we're all pretty much the same if you get to know us. But here is the question: why in the world do we who are rich have so much? Ever think about that? Why in the world do we who are rich have so much? You don't need it. I don't need it. Heck, I live in a 2,100 square foot house, which is smaller than most houses in this area. And really, my wife and I pretty much live in 3 rooms. It's a split-level house. We never even go into the basement. I mean, it's a finished basement. We never even go into the basement. And we could live in a house half our size, a quarter our size, and be completely happy. Oh, and most of the people in the world do. But so why do we have these houses that are so much bigger than we need? Because we're kissing up and we're kicking down. Because we're told this is what success looks like. By they, whoever they are, the authority figures, this is what success looks like. So I got to have this because I want to be successful and I want everybody to know that I'm successful. But meanwhile, all the poor people will become an attraction. We're willing to let them go hungry. We're willing to let them suffer because the money that we put into our great big houses is no longer available to help them. That's kicking up, kissing down. That's kissing up, kicking down. You ever thought about that? That starts to hit a little close to home, doesn't it? Simon Sinek, who is a person who recently, he's written several books, Leaders Eat Last. He's got, I think, the best known of all TED Talks on asking the question why. He says this. He says, what does he say? Is that right? Let me see. That's, I have one here. I think I ran off too many of these things. That doesn't look right. Sorry. Okay, here we go. This is the one I want. We in the developed world are generally not working to survive. We have more than enough of everything we need, so much so that we can actually afford to waste it. According to a 2004 study by an anthropologist, as much as 50% of ready-to-harvest food will never be eaten. In fact, the average American household wastes 14% of food purchases, 15% of which are products that have not yet expired. Translated into dollars, the average American family is throwing out nearly $600 a year in meat, fruit, vegetables, and grain products. Simply learning to preserve food would save nearly $43 billion a year. How much food and energy we throw out, how much money we spend wantonly, and that's a whole other subject, is an indication of how little we really need. Think about that a second. That's sitting pretty close to home. This is the burden of having too much. It's easy to spend or dispose of what we don't need when there's plenty more available, right? And then he goes on to say, and this may be our biggest challenge, the fact that we as a society we feel no burden. Few of us volunteer to help people in need before a natural disaster, only after it. Ironically, the more we have, the bigger our fences, the more sophisticated our security systems to keep people away, and the less we want to share. Our desire for more, combined with reduced physical interaction with common folks, lets them become an abstraction, and it disconnects us to the reality of how we're kissing up but kicking down. We feel no burden because people in need around us have become an abstraction. But if I sat down with them face to face, I guarantee you that'd make a difference. So let me just tell you 2 quick stories about that, and then we're done. One is, it's been a surprise to me, but in the last 2 or 3 years, I have learned that we actually have healthy is the wrong word, but there is a thriving sex trade in the Northern Virginia area. And Sergeant Johnson shakes his head. He knows all about it. And one of the ways that you begin to see this, and I've only recently begun to pay attention to this, I've learned more about it, is all the signs that get stuck up that say massage, $60 an hour, then there's a phone number underneath it or whatever they say. They're little portable signs. They'll put them up in the morning. Likelihood is they might be torn down by the evening, but that doesn't matter because, several thousand people are going to drive by it, and there's going to be a few businessmen who are going to call that number. And that's enough to keep the money rolling in. The police will pull it up. Other people will pull it up, but that's okay because they've got a whole bunch more signs just like it. And they'll come in and they'll change the number, so the police don't get wise to them, and then they'll put it in and they'll keep their operation moving. Now, who do they staff that with? Well, one of the people they staff it with is with young people from our own area. They're not abducted, so you don't hear about it, but what happens is they get older women. By older women, I'm actually talking teenage girls. And they get the teenage girls to target younger teenage girls. And so they'll go to the mall. They'll go to the movie theater on Friday. Now, Jesus is talking about noticing people in need, making a difference. Are you going to notice them or is somebody else going to notice them? Am I going to notice them or somebody else going to? If we don't notice them, here's what happens. This older person notices this young person who's there. It looks like they don't have any friends. Looks like maybe they're a little lonely. Looks like maybe they're sort of standing a little on the outside of a group. And these guys are skilled. They know what to look for. And so they go, and this is going to be an attractive young woman, and she's going to come up and say, hey, how you doing tonight? And strike up a conversation and get to know this young woman. And then maybe she'll come back the next Friday, see if the young woman's there. Young woman's there, talk to her again. Eventually going to get her phone number. Eventually going to invite her to a party. Young woman's going to be cool. First time in her life, man, she's going to belong. Eventually going to start slipping her a little bit of drugs, and eventually they're going to push her into the practice. She's going to start to make money, and she's going to be co-opted into the whole thing. So who's going to notice her? You, me, or them? So that's the reality of what Jesus is talking about today. Second is these Thanksgiving bags. We ask you to fill out these Thanksgiving bags. And we look at those and we think, man, they're abstractions to us. We don't think of the lives behind them. It's a bag. It's not a bag. It's a life. It's a life. And this past week, on Thursday afternoon, I don't know, it's about quitting time, and I still had way too much to do. And I think Miriam had way more than I had to do, even more. And a woman who serves as our liaison to some of the poor people in this community came in to hand out some of those bags. And I didn't get to say hello. I mean, I know her, but I was too busy to say hello. Miriam, who is a giver, said hello to her, talked to her, found out that this was the anniversary of the day her father died. She was having a down day. And so Miriam, in a very helpful way, just stuck her head in my office real quickly and said, hey, this woman's having a bad day. Maybe you'll just say hello to her. And I kind of thought, thank you very much. Leave me alone. But then when I had time to say that, I thought, okay, I'll go out and talk with her. So I went out and I talked with her. She never mentioned the fact that her father died. What she started talking about was the families we were helping. She said, see that bag there? See all the diapers in that bag? She said, that woman, she lives just a few blocks away from here, and she had a child, but she just lost her job. And diapers are expensive, and she has just been praying for diapers. She didn't know if she's going to even have diapers for it. That bag, that's going to keep her baby in diapers. So you see that bag there? So that's going to a family. That guy, he had a job around here. He doesn't have a car for various reasons. He can't afford a car, and he has to walk to work. And because of the economy, he just lost his job. And he's living with 3 other families in a one-room house in a basement with no windows. He said, there's 4 people in one family, 4 people in the other family, 5 people in the other family. One room. He said he just lost his, and he has no idea how he's going to, family just down the block. He had no idea how he's going to feed his family. That bag right there, that bag's going to keep his family in food for the next couple of weeks. That's going to let them celebrate Thanksgiving together. So that's what happens when people stop kissing up and kicking down, and let the people around them stop being abstractions, but see them for who they really are. Are we willing to part with our privileged and excessive lifestyle to really help other people in the ways that we could? And I'll tell you one other characteristic, just real quickly, of takers. Takers don't learn. One of the most surprising things about this parable is when Jesus said, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. The people don't say, oh my goodness, you're right, I didn't, I am so sorry. I can't even believe it. How could have I been so blind? Oh my goodness, Jesus, help me. They don't. They say, Jesus, we never saw you. You're wrong, Jesus. I'm a good person. If I had seen you, I would have helped you. I'm good, Jesus. Don't you be telling me that I'm not a good person. You see, takers have so much invested in their own ego, they just won't see themselves differently. So the question is, as we hear this parable, and maybe we're thinking the same thing, I haven't been as helpful to hungry folks as I could have been. I haven't been as helpful to people suffering around us as I could have been. Oh, I could do more. I could do without. There's lots of things in my life that I don't need, and I could do without them, and the question is, do we listen to that voice, and do we change? Do we say, hey, maybe I'm not as good a person as I might have thought I was, and let this gospel do its work in our heart? Or do we say, I'm a good person. Somebody else will take care of them. I do a lot already. That, my friends, is the difference between the sheep and the goats, the givers and the takers. It's a hard question, but I believe we have the courage and by God's grace the ability to answer it well. And I hope you and I will. Amen? Amen.